By the time of the end of the Judges, we have not just a messy family, we have a messy collection of tribes where there's not centralized leadership. People are not following God's laws. It's not organized. And the people come to Samuel and say, we need a strong leader. They didn't say we need to come back to God. They said we need a strong leader. We want a king like the other nations. If you would just take out your Joseph envelope, your Benjamin card, and your Judah. These are tribes now, and they are in the land. And there's our map behind those envelopes. Now, we already know from this time in Scripture that for the last several hundred years in their history, they know that the scepter won't depart from Judah, but there's no king. There is no scepter. But that's what Jacob had said several hundred years earlier. The scepter won't depart from Judah. So all the time of the Judges, as God is getting the nation ready for a king, a righteous nation, a righteous king, we know it's going to come from Judah, but when Samuel anoints the first king, Saul, he is from the tribe of Benjamin. And that's what I want you to write onto the little tribe of Benjamin. There's going to be a centralized leadership of this nation, and King Saul is from little Benjamin. And he's anointed by God. This isn't someone trying to take power. This is God saying, choose that man, Samuel. Okay. Did you figure it out? Did you figure out why God would have Saul as the first king of this nation? Watch. You have a bunch of disorganized tribes that have all been kind of vying for power. Remember the squabbling? Hey, why didn't you include us? Ephraim wants to assert itself. And where's the scepter going to come from? Do you see that old sibling rivalry? It was Judah who had originally sold Joseph. That's an old family thing. That's the family secret. If the scepter comes immediately from Judah, what does that automatically do? Do you see some kickback there from Ephraim? Just ready to push back. So what does God do? He picks the first king from what tribe? Now where's Benjamin located? Do you see the map there? That's where Ephraim is, Manasseh, and this is where Judah is, and Benjamin is just a tiny little tribe. Do you see what God is doing? Did you catch it? What is he doing? What's his hand working here? What does he want for his people? I want you to act as and work as one unified group. And by putting the first king from Benjamin, he's pulling the tribes of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, and he's pulling Judah to work together. It's to prepare the people for the king that he has for them in David. And King Saul turns away from God. He won't obey God. And this is another thing that God makes very clear. In the very first king, this is not just a political appointment. Your king has to obey my authority. Your king is not here. Your king is here. And if he doesn't, he will lose the kingdom. So the kingdom is taken away from Saul. And then David is anointed after that. And David is from the tribe of Judah. Now we have the scepter not departing from Judah. And here's our little envelope, our little David envelope. David is from Bethlehem. Go ahead and jot that fact on your envelope. David is born in Bethlehem. And of course, that should sound familiar to you, especially as we start heading in towards Christmas, that David was born in Bethlehem in the territory of Judah. So you know that King David is going to go inside your little Judah envelope because he is from the tribe of Judah. And where did David first reign as king? Now you probably think, oh, David was king in Jerusalem. But that's not where he first was king. Because when David first became king, the rest of the tribes did not acknowledge his kingship. They didn't want someone from Judah reigning over them. So David was king from a city that was in the region of Judah. If David is king from way down south, do you see who's going to have problems with that? That's going to be some problems from those in the north. And so when David, after he's been king for about 7 years, the rest of the nation says, we want you to be our king too. And he becomes king over both Judah and all the other tribes. Then he moves his capital city to Jerusalem And guess which territory Jerusalem is in? Just barely, it's just over the border, but it is significant. You can probably take a guess. If you want to unify the country, where would you put it? You'd put it in the middle. Jerusalem is in the tribal territory of Benjamin. And that becomes significant. It's a political move, and yet we know that God has already chosen the city of Jerusalem from the time of Abraham. You see the hand of God? Now, if you were just following the newspaper at that time, the political news going on with Saul and David and Saul's family fighting and David and the tribes and not taking David as king, and then David does get, you would just get so swept up without realizing that when David takes Jerusalem, God had already chosen that place 1,000 years before David even makes it hit the capital city. That is the hand of God, working the events that to a casual observer, it's just politics going on here. And when he wants to build a house for God, a temple for God, he wants the other nations to come and see how great his God is. And God says to him, he sends the prophet Nathan to him, and he says, David won't build a house for me. That's not what I want. But I will build a house for David. Look at the verse in 2 Samuel. It's just on your envelope there. Your throne shall be established. What's the word? Forever. You will always have someone to sit on your throne, David. That was the promise. There was one other thing that David did during his reign. He had such a passion for the worship of the one true God in this land so that the other nations could come. If you read through the Psalms, many people will just read through the Psalms. Even if they don't read anywhere else in Scripture, they'll read the Psalms. I want you to notice how many times it talks about the other nations, the other nations. The other nations. Remember the promise to Abraham? You are going to be a blessing through your seed. All the families of the earth will be blessed. David's now reigning in Jerusalem, and he wants there to be the worship of the one true God. These nations have turned away from it, and he wants them to come and see and know the one true God. That's his desire. So, you know those Levites that were, what were the two words I used? Lazy, and they had lost their vision because when the tabernacle didn't need to be carried anymore, what did they need to do? So they had kind of been drifting in their purpose. Well, David reorganizes the Levites, and he makes thousands of them singers, professional singers and instrument players for the worship of God. That's their devoted job, become singers to the God of heaven. Solomon is the one who becomes the king after David, and Solomon does build the temple. When Solomon gets done building the temple, he asks God to please put your name here. And Solomon says, God, the whole heavens cannot contain you. We know that you are infinite, but if there is just one place on earth where people can come to find you, would you make that here at this temple, this little tiny temple out of the whole earth? And you know what God says? Yes. Out of all the places in the earth that a person can go, I have consecrated this house by putting my name there forever. God is willing to limit himself to this place in order to be found by people seeking him. There's nowhere else. There's nowhere else. You can't go down to Egypt and find that. You can't go down up to Assyria. This is it. This house in Jerusalem that Solomon builds. And God gives him a warning. If you turn away from me and go after all the other gods, I will destroy this house. And everyone will say, what in the world happened here? But somehow in the blessing of, yes, I will put my name there, that other part kind of just got missed. It's there, but they just went on past it. After Solomon builds the temple, and by the way, it takes 7 years for him to build it, everything was made off-site and brought to the building site. So you didn't hear any hammers and you didn't hear pounding going on. All the stones for it were carved off-site and brought in. Took 7 years to build this. It was magnificent. And then Solomon's heart turns away from God. What could ever take Solomon's heart away from God?